are joined by the one and only Mr. Mark Billingham. Mark, how are you?
I'm good, Luca. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks very much. So,
Excellent.
I think you're going to be the first, like, you're the guinea pig for this new kind of format. And it is going to be a lot different than well, a lot. I say a lot. You know, a lot of the previous podcasts were very meandering, and I think this will be as well. But what this is more about is about you and how did you get here? Is basically how did you get
Okay.
here? You know?
Okay.
So I've got your Wikipedia article up on here, and we're not gonna dive into the whole thing because we could be here all day just correcting, you know, the.
Yeah, I mean, Wikipedia is, not always accurate anyway. And there certainly was a point a while ago. I haven't checked, but there was a point a while ago when my kids, or at least one of my kids, was just going on and changing stuff for their own amusement, changing my middle name, or whatever it might be, just little things which people wouldn't notice, but would just make them laugh. So I don't know how accurate the Wikipedia page is. Let's find out.
This is why I'm glad I haven't got a Wikipedia page, because there is a number of people in my family who would just go on.
Yeah, go to town. Yeah.
Luca Veste, born, John Smith.
Yeah. In Surrey.
Sorry.
Never been to Liverpool.
Okay, so the first line of your Wikipedia article is Mark Philip David Billingham, born 2nd of July 1961.
All good so far.
So why the reason why the first thing that jumped out to me is the two middle names. It's a very Catholic thing.
Is it?
Yeah. So you get a confirmation name.
Right.
Like you'd have like mine is like Luca John, and then you get a confirmation name. I never had a confirmation name, so I never got to that point. We stopped going to church at a certain point.
Is that in case you become Pope one day, Luca?
Possibly. I mean, I don't know if we're all on the list waiting. I don't know if it's like,
I'd love to see that. I would love to see that. You in one of the Pope mobiles, driving through the streets of Liverpool. Hello.
Well, he did kiss the time. I can speak there, but yeah, so you're not Catholic. You weren't born Catholic. You weren't raised Catholic, no?
No, not raised anything. Just
why the two middle names then?
I don't know, because my brother's only got one. I really don't know. I mean, Philip and David is the name of one of my mum's brothers.
Right.
That's the only I've never really asked. I've never really asked my mum about it. But no, certainly not a religious thing.
So you're born very early 60s.
Yeah.
In the time, it's 16 years post-war.
Mm-hmm.
And it says you were born in Solihull, Warwickshire, and then grew up in Moseley, Birmingham.
Correct.
So, do you want to give us so how long were you in Solihull for? Because it says
I just think that's where I was born. I think it's just where my mum and dad were living at the time. And when I don't know how long I was there, but my mum and dad's divorced when I was 6, I think. And from that point on, we were in Moseley in Birmingham. My mum and me and brother in a maisonette. I've never really known what a maisonette was, other than that's what we lived in. It was just a little single floor, like a ground floor flat. Yeah. In Moseley, which is a great part of Birmingham, and he's now, they do these things every so often, the most desirable place to live in the country. A few years ago, it was Moseley. It's a really nice place, very studenty now, but it was a great little place. It was called Moseley Village. There was a little village with a little record shop and a butcher's and a baker's and all that sort of stuff. That was a nice place to grow up.
What's your earliest memory from childhood?
I remember sitting on my dad's knee and him making me read, which is kind of an odd thing. I don't mean making me read the newspaper.
Right.
At a really, really early age. I think I could read very early. I didn't understand what I was reading, but he was very keen on making me read. And I'd love to say that he was doing that because he wanted to open me up to the wonderful world of literature. But I think he was just, I probably saw I had an aptitude for that kind of thing at an early age and just thought, right, let's let's make him work a bit for this. Yeah, just and all the normal things, just playing football in the, kicking the ball against the garages near where we lived, and doing all sorts of naughty stuff, throwing eggs at buses, and we used to do. Me and a couple of mates, naughty boys they were. I was I liked hanging around with the naughty boys, but I wasn't really a naughty boy. Do you know what I mean? I was always a little bit scared. I'd always go, really? Is this, we really should throw eggs at buses? And putting dog poo in a paper bag, right? Then putting it on somebody's doorstep and setting fire to it. And then knocking the door and running away, all that stuff. And, knocking the door and running away, which we used to call thunder and lightning. What's it called in Liverpool?
We called it knock a door run.
Knock a door run? Okay. No, thunder and lightning for some reason in Birmingham.
That's what we called it, but there's about 60 different ways.
It's knockdown ginger, isn't it? I've never known why it's been called knockdown ginger, but
there's loads of different. I mean, I still don't understand the point of it. I was because I was the kid who would be like trying to bring logic into everything. I'd be like, but why are we doing? But why do we do this? Let's think of something more.
They'll come to the door and there'll be nobody there. What's the point of that?
I was like, surely we want to be seen as. Surely they should just hear our laughter just in the distance,
Yeah, echoing the peals of laughter as you run away.
There was also like we have to because where I grew up there was loads of different places where I grew up, but it was like small greens. So it was like, like you go into a little road and there was like, just houses around the green. You could only do one at a time in that green. So you'd have to go and find another green because you couldn't do one and then come back because like those people would still be outside just going like, I saw you.
Yeah.
So do you think so back in the 60s, like you saying Moseley is like a desirable place to grow up and it's very studenty now, but what was it like in the 60s? Was it a working class area type of thing? Or?
It was very weird. There's a road that runs like right through the middle of it called the Waite Green Road. And one side of it was kind of not, there was a vicarage and, not kind of nice houses and nice roads. That's where I used to do my paper round. I did a paper round around those roads, delivering papers to Roy Wood out of Wizard. But literally on the other side of the road, you suddenly were into like Borsall Heath and areas of Birmingham that was like the red light area, and it was all separated by one road. It was really kind of weird. So it was a strange mix, really. It was a strange mix of slightly rougher areas and quite middle class areas. It was an interesting place to grow up. I did like it a lot.
Where did you gravitate towards? The people that you kind of hung around with? Where were they?
You see, I guess everything is about where you go to school, isn't it? And I think I was the last year. We might have been the last year to do the 11 plus. So you did this exam, and I went. I got into the grammar school, the state grammar school, and my brother didn't. My brother went to the comprehensive, and we sort of went in separate directions. So I guess from the age of 11. I was hanging out with slightly more middle class kids. We were just ordinary kids. My mum worked really bloody hard to bring up two kids.
What did she work as? She
had a brilliant job. She had a variety of jobs, but the one I remember mostly is she worked for a company that put fruit machines and jukeboxes in pubs. So her job was to go around and empty them. Wow. So when I wasn't at school, I'd be sitting in a car outside a pub. And my mum would bring me out pop and crisps, and she'd have to go in and empty the jukeboxes and the fruit machines. And people used to put dodgy coins into. They used to put Irish 50p's and stuff. And my mum would just keep them, and me and my mates would go into town with Irish coins, and you could put an Irish 50p into one of these machines in town and get 5-10p bits out of it. So it was a nice little source of spending money. And also, she used to get the records from the jukeboxes that when they were being replaced. So she'd bring home singles, with the centers missing because they were from a jukebox, but you could buy those things to put on the record player, So that was, that was my first exposure to kind of 45 RPM records as well. But I did go to a very strange junior school.
Yeah.
Well, it was strange for me in that it was an Orthodox Jewish primary school, and I'm not Jewish, right?
Okay, how did that happen?
Well, I don't remember too much about it, other than the school I was at before that. For some reason, it got closed down. I don't know why. There may have been some kind of scandal. I do not know. I can't remember the name of it, but it got closed down, and all the kids in it just got put in their nearest schools. Then the nearest primary schools to them, and mine was King David Primary School in Moseley, which was a Jewish school. Which led to all sorts of shenanigans. I think there were 3 of us in the whole school, me and my brother and another kid who weren't Jewish. So we were excused certain things. We were excused Hebrew lessons. I mean, there were Hebrew lessons. So they'd send us out to play football when the Hebrew lessons were on. But everything else, I mean, I had to wear a yarmulke, right? I had to wear a yarmulke. And I remember having this argument with my mum when I'd say, Mum, why can't I have a nice silk yarmulke like all the other kids? Because she'd say, "You're not Jewish," and I'd go, "No, I'm well aware of that, but every day I have to buy one of these paper ones that's like 5p, right? You buy a little paper one and put it on for 5p." And I said, "It's a false economy, Mum." Even at that age, I figured out it was a way. I said, "Just go to the shop and buy me one of these nice ones for a couple of quid," and she wouldn't do it. And there were also I got sent home from school one day because I had smoky bacon crisps at school, right? And my auntie Sue, who was a bit fierce, she went marching up to the school and was like, "If you think there's any bacon in these bloody crisps," it was. But it was a great school. I mean, it was a fantastic school. So it was my first experience of like any kind of drama. I'd only been about 8, but we did school plays, but they were like religious school plays. There were things like Daniel in the Lion's Den and all that sort of stuff. But I used to really enjoy that. And it also had the single best bit of teaching I've ever even heard about. One day we all turned up at school and the teacher, Mr. Turnbull, said, "Right, we're not in class today. We're going out into the playground. Everybody take your shoes and socks off." And we all were going, "What's going on now?" And we all ran out in the playground. And on the playground, there's this huge sheet of plastic that's been fixed across the playground and these huge trays of white paint. And he said, "Right, everybody run around in the paint." And we were going, "What?" So we all had to put our feet in these tubs of paint. And then he said, "Right, run around on the plastic." And so we were in the paint and we're running around on the plastic. Did this for about half an hour. He said, "Right, clean your feet up and put your shoes and socks back on." And then what we hadn't realized is there were little holes in the plastic. And when we took the sheet of plastic up, there were just loads of little dots all over the playground. We then spent the next hour joining the dots, and it's a map of the world.
Wow.
And then the rest of the lesson was, well, that's Africa, and that map of the world is still there on that playground.
That's amazing.
And I remember that day vividly. I just thought even then I thought, this is brilliant. This is proper teaching. We had fantastic fun. And then the end of it, we had this geography lesson. And the fact that it's still there, that map, is a great thing. I think about that a lot.
If I can find a photograph of it, I'll throw it up here. But
yeah,
that's incredible. I mean, so it's amazing though, isn't it? When you grow up, is like the things that you remember are those types of things, those standout moments, and it's usually, especially for kids, it's like if a teacher has done something out of the ordinary, it really resonates. And having done quizzes with you, I know that geography is
It didn't stay with me. You'll know that didn't stay with me. But I often wonder if that was something that happened that day at schools all across the country, that these kits had been sent out to schools, huge sheets of plastic, and I can't believe it just happened at my little school, but it was good. That was good.
You've mentioned your brother a couple of times. Are you the older or the younger of the two?
Older by about 18 months.
So you are quite close. And were you quite close until you got to 11?
Yeah, I mean, it is that classic split. It was just me and my brother at home with my mum, and then he went to one kind of school. I went to another sort of school. He had different mates. He left school. He didn't stay on at school. He left school at 16, and I stayed on. And I mean, we've never been close he's worked. He worked from the age of 16. He's always done a proper job, and has lived for a long time up in Newcastle, where he works as a chef in a special school. He works in the kitchen, and he's always been very hardworking lad. He's 60. What am I talking about?
Do Do you think that if he'd have gone to the same school as you, he would have a very different life, and you may have been closer?
Yeah. Oh, for sure, for sure, for sure. I just think, you know, you go in different directions, don't you? You go in different directions, and I also think he'd only have been four, so I think he was probably a bit more affected by my mum and dad splitting up. I think, although I can barely remember it, so I'm not sure he can. But yeah, no, I think we would have stayed closer if we'd gone to the same schools. But that just must happen in all sorts of in families all over the place, you know.
I mean, like the closest brother I've got. I mean, I'm one of nine, so it's a bit weird. But like, it's the closest brother I've got in age is only, I think, 2.5 years between us. But we have very different recollections of my parents splitting up, and it
Yeah,
has affected us both in very different ways. And it can just happen in that you do react to different situations. Everyone's individual, aren't they? You do react to the same.
yeah, and you're different people anyway. I mean, my brother's into all sorts. My brother's a biker, so he's a tattooed heavy rock listening biker. We couldn't be more different in terms of our sort of interests and stuff. Funny, isn't it? It's weird.
I mean, but I mean, like, wait until if you had more than one. I'll tell you now, there's even more differences.
9, I cannot imagine not. Mind you, I've seen you eat, so I mean, I know that when you go out with 9, you don't mess about with food.
No. If you don't eat, you don't eat at all. That's what happens.
Exactly.
So you go to on Wikipedia, going back to your Wikipedia page, it does actually name the school, the King Edward VI Camp Hill School for Boys.
Yeah.
Camp Hill schools.
Yeah, it's an area of Birmingham, Luca.
Is this where the love of Carry On films started?
There is just a bit of Birmingham that's called Camp Hill, all right. It was a cracking school. I mean, again, it was a state school, but it was a state school that kind of with ideas above its station. It had houses and prefects and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes the teachers would even wear like gowns, and obviously there was corporal punishment and all that kind of stuff, which kids today just, quite rightly haven't got an idea about. What would they? But it was a cracking school, and I got into, but it was one of those schools where unless you were brilliant at sport, and the main sports were like cricket and rugby, and unless you were brilliant at those, or you were an academic superstar, you could be a bit anonymous. And I think I was a bit anonymous because I certainly wasn't, I was always in the second or third team for everything. And I was only ever really good at English, rubbish at science and all that stuff. So you had to find your thing. And for me, that was the minute school plays came along. And once the school plays came along, and I just thought, oh, right, I can still remember the moment. It was Oliver, which I'm sure every school has done a production of Oliver. You must have been in a production of Oliver.
No, Oliver happened the year before I started.
Oh, okay. You'd have made a good Bill Sykes, I think, in Oliver. Bullseye. And so there was a production of Oliver, and I was the art cast as the Artful Dodger. And I can still remember that moment of coming on and doing Con City yourself and doing the silly dance, and my nan waving from like the front row. And
how old was you when you did that?
12 maybe. And when the audience clapped at the end of that song, I thought, oh, I like this is good. So like every year, there'd always be a school play, and that was the thing, the only thing I kind of thought about every year. And obviously as you get older, the plays get more kind of ambitious, and you end up doing, Arthur Miller and Shakespeare and all this sort of stuff. And I just bloody loved it. I just loved every minute of it.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, when you think about 60s and 70s grammar schools, you don't expect them to have, but a lot of them did across the country. Is these kind of stuffy type of, very academic places did have a real big arts kind of side to them.
Yeah. And if you had the right kind of teacher who wanted to do particular kinds of plays, there were all the standard plays that people would do, but every so often somebody would do, we had a teacher, do you know what I'm still in touch with? A teacher who did a production of a show called Sergeant Musgrave's Dance by John Arden, which is pretty kind of left-wing, sort of, anti-war sort of. And I remember him, I think he got into a bit of trouble for doing that. But no, it was great. The other thing was, so there was the boys' school, and literally next door was the girls' school in the same kind of foundation, only separated by a playground. So the boys would be in the playground watching the girls playing netball in the playground and all that stuff. But if you did the plays, girls would come over from the girls' school to be in the plays. Boys would go over to the girls' school to be in their plays. So that was the way you got to hang out with the girls as well. You'd go home at 4:00 and you'd get changed into your cool non-uniform clothes and then come back at like 7:00 for a rehearsal. And that was just, I can so remember, rocking up to school at 7:00 in my flares, right? In my flares and my red kickers. I had a pair of red kickers and a cheesecloth shirt and a denim waistcoat. And I'm like, yes. To rehearse Oliver or The Crucible or whatever it might be.
I remember when I was at school, because I had two very different strands. I was very sporty. I played every sport that I could possibly play, but I also did a hell of a lot of drama as well. And I remember talking to like people in like the changing rooms and stuff like that. Like the lads who were like, they could play football, and then that was it. That was literally the only thing they could do in life. They were like 15, and they used to say to me like, "Why'd you do that? Why'd you do the drama and stuff? That's just weird. That's just like I'm like, that is the best place to meet that was the best place to meet because like it was just, you were basically shoved in this little hall and you have to sit around for a while if you're not on stage, and all you can do is and that's the main thing I remember from it, is that like, but if you were in a boys' school, I can imagine that that was a huge thing.
It was brilliant. But I mean, certainly by the time I was 16, by the time I was doing my O levels, I decided I was going to be an actor. That's what I wanted to do. It was all I wanted to do. It was absolutely fine with my mum. She was just great. Go for it. My dad, who obviously by that time he was away and married again. And when I saw him, I think he always wanted me to be a solicitor or an architect or something.
What did he do though for a living?
He was he started off as like an electrical engineer. But by that time he was a serial like entrepreneur. He would start companies and they would fail, and he would work something out. But eventually he started this company selling like replacement windows and double glazing and stuff, and actually ended up doing quite well. He got bought out by a big company and retired at like 50 or something, which I think in retrospect he would admit was a mistake. Because he didn't really have many hobbies. He didn't have anything he was going to do when he was 50. He just thought, I'm just going to sit about all day, and I think he got bored. But anyway, everybody was perfectly happy with me being an actor. It wasn't a sort of, don't put your daughter on stage, Mrs. Worthington. It was like, yeah, go on, go for it.
Which is interesting because Birmingham, I always think of Birmingham as like just a bit more southern Liverpool, and like a lot bigger, I think. But it could be one of those things where it's like, no, when are you going to get a proper job type of thing,
Well, a little bit. There was just nobody in my family ever had, gone in that direction. Nobody in my family had gone to university. So, there was that. And the idea that I was going there to do a drama degree because I wanted to be an actor was just like such an exotic idea compared with what anybody else in the family had done. But it was cool. It was fine.
Did you not think at any point though that looking back now, did you think do you think your parents may have gone like, you went to this great grammar school and he could to do drama, it's still a bit like like he's had this start, do you think not?
Yeah, there was a bit. I mean, my dad would say to me things like, well, give yourself a couple of years, and if you don't crack it, I think he thought that, in a couple of years, if I wasn't, Kenneth Branagh, that, I'd give it up and start something else, that I'd just chuck it in and go, well, I had to go. But they were sort of cool about it. It was fine.
Did you see your dad regularly then when you were growing up?
Sort of every other weekend. Me and my brother would get shipped over to have a weekend with him and whichever number wife he was on then. And that was, it was all a bit, the dad and your stepmother kind of thing. And my dad lived a more luxurious life than we did at home. because he'd made some money, you know. So it was it was all a bit odd. And then he left the country. Then he left, and from fairly early age, he hasn't lived in the UK, so didn't see him very often after that.
So I mean, you know, you are a writer now, and we are how you got there now, but and you talk a lot about the acting side of things and that in school. Was writing ever a part of any of that? Did you ever write anything that you?
Oh yeah, no, it really was. I mean, I talked about that buzz when I was on stage being the Artful Dodger. The other buzz I can remember, really remember, is that thing of writing a story in class and then being brought to the front to read it out to the other kids. And I'd always try and write something funny, and because showing off and put some jokes in. And that, if I made the other kids laugh in the class, that was such a rush. I really remember that. So I would always try and I remember one of the earliest things I wrote, oddly, was a sort of Sherlock Holmes pastiche. I can even remember what it was called. It was called Sherlock Houses. Do you see what I did there? All right. I think I was about 12. Sherlock Houses and the Case of the Golden Gooseberry. I can still remember it. It was like a little Sherlock Holmes pastiche that I wrote, and then we performed it and stuff. So yeah, no, I was writing stuff. I was writing stuff, but with absolute not harboring any ambitions to do that professionally, or even thinking that was a thing. You know, I'd never met a writer. I'd never, but no. So yeah, it was acting that I had my heart fixed on.
Was you reading a lot as a kid at this point as well?
Yeah, I'd certainly, by the time I was 15, somewhere around there, I read. We read good books at school. We had to, To Kill a Mockingbird and Animal Farm, whatever you'd get given. But they're books you read at school, so they're sort of like homework. But I remember reading one summer back to back Jaws and The Godfather. I think I may well have shoplifted them from W.H. Smith in Moseley Village. I'm sorry if there's anybody from W.H. Smith watching. I don't know if there's a statute of limitations. You can still do me for that. And they were two paperback, and I knew nothing about either of them. I think this was before. Was it before Jaws had come out? No, it must have been. It must have been after both movies had come out. But I knew nothing about them because I wasn't old enough to go to see the movies. And I just read these two paperbacks and went, bloody hell. I mean, I didn't know that a book could do that. I mean, obviously they've got graphic sort of violence in them, which I'd never read on a page. You're not allowed to read that stuff at school. So to read, this violence and terror and all this stuff. And of course, there's naughty bits in both those books, which when you're a teenage boy, that's quite exciting. So yeah, I started reading from that point on. And very crucially, we had this teacher who, this really eccentric maths teacher called Len Bowles, who was just a proper old nutcase. One of these guys who'd balance chairs on his chin and he would juggle with oranges, and he would get bored in maths lessons. He would get bored in his own lessons, and he had a battered old brown leather bag, and he'd pull out a copy of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and he would just read us Sherlock Holmes stories in maths lessons. So I can remember thinking, this is fantastic. I like this character. He's really interesting. So yeah, I'd started to get a little bit bitten by the bug of detective fiction and thrillers quite early. But again, just as a reader.
I mean, that's the thing is that even at that point, becoming an actor seems to have been more attainable than being a writer.
Yeah. There seemed to be a way to do it. You would go, you went to drama school, then you got loads of jobs and became really famous. Easy, right?
Yeah, that easy.
But no, at least there was a route. If somebody had said to me at that day, if I'd said I want to be a writer, I don't think anybody could have told me how you go about doing it. I mean, this was the days when you had careers people come to school and you'd have a day of, going into the careers thing. And I think when I said I wanted to be an actor, the bloke just went, all right, next.
So you go to the University of Birmingham at 18 years of age. That would be what, 1979?
Yeah, well, 80, because I actually had an extra. I had an extra year at school because I was doing the Oxbridge entrance exam and for English, and then there was a huge screw up because I went through the whole extra year of doing S-level English and all this stuff, the Oxbridge exam, and then they pointed out that you had to have a language. I don't know whether it's different now, but in those days you had to have a foreign language, and I'd only got something like a D in my French A-level, so I just wasn't allowed to do it. So I'd wasted a whole year. It was a weird thing. But anyway, so yeah, 1980 I went.
like another sliding doors moment, though, isn't it? Because you don't pass your 11 plus, you don't go to the grammar school. If you had
Yeah,
you'd have got a C instead of a D, you may have gone to Oxford.
I may have done. I may have done, but I'm very glad I went to Birmingham. I'm very glad I did. I mean, it was in some ways a lazy option, to go to Birmingham instead of Manchester or Bristol to do drama, because they all had brilliant drama departments. But Birmingham was a slightly more cowardly choice in that I could. By that time, I was already living independently. When I was about 16, my mum moved from Birmingham to a place called Redditch,
Right.
which is a decent schlep from where I was at school. Yeah. But there was a flat above my nan's flat, and I was able to go and live in this flat. So I was living in my own flat, like from the age of 16, and I stayed in that flat all the way through university. It was brilliant.
That's interesting. So did your brother go with your mum, or did he stay behind? Where was he?
No, my mum. Yeah, my brother went with my mum. He was working by that time, or no. What am I talking about? My brother would only have been about 14 or 15. Yeah, he must have done. I can't actually remember, other than I know I was living in this flat, 2 floors above my nan's flat, going to school and then going to university and still having this flat. So I was quite the cool kid in my first year at university, because I had my own place. So that became kind of party central. But
yeah, get annoyed about the noise.
My nan used to cook for him. My nan used to cook for all my mates. They'd go, "Can we come round and have your nan's cheese pie?" Yeah.
So you're in University of Birmingham. You study it. It says here a degree in drama.
In drama and theatre arts.
Drama and theatre arts is what it says. A degree in drama from the Department of. So we can get that corrected.
Yeah. All right.
And so you did that 3 years. So
yeah.
Graduated in 1983.
Yeah.
Incidentally, the year I was born.
I knew there'd be one of these little digs at some point.
Every time we talk, we have to throw one of these in. So 19 graduated with a degree in drama, and you were thinking, what how did the university? What was it like at university at that time?
It was great. It was just great. I mean, there were only about 16 of us in the whole year, so everybody knew everybody else. Everybody pretty much slept with everybody else. It was a grand time. I mean, and obviously, I had a grant to go. My rent on my flat was paid, and I didn't finish university with an overdraft. It was, you could still be in the pub every night. It was very easy and cheap to live, and I just got paid for wearing leg warmers and pretending to be a tree. I got a grant for that, and we did all sorts of great plays. And I'm still friends with half a dozen people I was at uni with, and yeah, I am still in touch with people from that time. And because a bunch of us, when we left, and the odd thing is, because it was a drama degree as opposed to a drama school, not everybody there wanted to be an actor. Some people were gravitating towards playwriting or directing or designing or whatever it might be. But those of us who were interested in in writing and acting, we formed a theatre company at the end of it, and stayed in Birmingham, which was the base for this theatre company, which I think is still going. It was a company called Bread and Circuses. It was so the League of Gentlemen.
Yeah.
The theatre company in that Legs Akimbo. Right, we were that theatre company. I mean, we were the most right on. It was a touring socialist theatre company, and we would travel around doing TIE, theatre and education shows in schools. We would do, we were so right on. The high point or low point, depending on how you look at it, being when we were doing a production. I think the production was called Apocalypse. Then it was about CND. And we were doing a performance of it in a shopping centre in Coventry. And we were all wearing dungaree. I mean, we all wore dungarees, and we held 2 minutes silence for the dead of Hiroshima. And I can remember like the 6 of us standing there in our dungarees while people are just wandering past with their shopping, going, what are these idiots doing? We were just sitting there in silence because it was the anniversary of Hiroshima. We were incredibly right on, incredibly. And it was hard work, chucking stuff in a van and driving around the West Midlands, doing these shows in schools and art centres and putting the sets up and doing all that. And then it was fun though.
You know, my impression of you in the 80s has now been replaced by the idea of you as being Rick from the Young Ones.
Yeah. There was a bit of that. We were so right on, but I think it was in a good way, and then in about 85, in the middle, I suppose I did that for 2 or 3 years. Moved to London, decided to, I needed to get an equity card. By that time, I had an equity card, which is what you needed back then. And I thought, right, I'm going to give this a bash. I'm going to actually give it a bash of being an actor.
Yeah. So that must have been a moment though, of the like a big decision to make. Is that you had gone through 20 odd years of being in Birmingham, and now you've gone around, but you knew even then that you needed to go to London if you were going to try and make it.
You kind of did. I mean, we were sort of making a living doing this community theatre, but I wanted to do telly and stuff like that, and yeah, you basically back then you had to get an agent, be in London, and just go to auditions and see how it went. So that's what I did.
So tell me what you did then. You obviously didn't just rock up at London and go, "Here I am." It's like.
Well, I did a play. I did a play which got me an agent. And from that point on, the weirdest thing happened. I went for about 4 auditions and I got everything. And these were odd little bits of telly, like Dempsey and Makepeace and Juliet Bravo and The Bill and all that kind of stuff. Only little parts, little cough and a spit, few lines, and the occasional dramatic death scene. But I kept getting, and I was thinking, this is great. And then suddenly I didn't. It's that thing of, getting a bunch of jobs and then not getting any jobs and things starting to look a little bit bleak. And then, so this would have been around, 87, somewhere around there. So around the same time I started going to alternative comedy nights. And there was a local club near where I live called the Old White Horse in Brixton that used to have a bill on every Friday night. I mean, brilliant acts, really, really good. And I just thought, this is great. And then I remember seeing a really bad act. Me and my mate Mike, who had also been in Bread and Circuses with me, and we went, we can do this. So we just put an act together and wrote some daft songs and started doing the comedy circuit.
So you've kind of covered quite a few years there, but I've seen your IMDb page mainly because I keep finding things that I watched when I was a kid that you happened to be in. But it's you mentioned like Dempsey and Makepeace, which was that's Steve, by the way. That was the name of your character who gets.
Oh, was it? Thank you.
It's an unfortunate end. And then you played Doyle and Juliet Bravo, and there's Starting Out, Boone. You were in 2 episodes of Boone, apparently.
Boone. I was a copper in Boone.
Yeah. So you were a policeman in Series 1, Episode 2, and Series 1, Episode 6. So,
oh, yeah.
But there is then a gap before you did News 12. So in that gap, you glossed over it there, but stand-up comedy out of nowhere. Had you ever thought about this before, or
no? I mean, we used to just go every Friday night, and you didn't care who was on. It was just a good club, and you knew there'd be good acts on. And this was when it was actually called cabaret rather than comedy. It was called alternative cabaret because it wasn't just stand up. You'd have some amazing, crazy acts. There was a guy called the Iceman who would just melt a block of ice on stage in various ways. There was the great Podomowski who'd stage aerial dogfights with Weetabix. I mean, there were just some crazy acts on, and bands and comics and magicians and impressionists, and it was really good. So me and Mike just said, let's write some songs. I mean, he was a brilliant musician, and he would write music, I would write some lyrics, we'd work out harmonies, and we would just do these. It was like country. We were both from Birmingham, so we used to do an act that we called Black Country and Western. So they were kind of country-ish songs about modern issues. At that time, it was all about new men and all that stuff. I remember a song we did called Reconstructed Man, and so we did that. And back then, you could get onto the comedy circuit quite easily. I think we were playing at the Comedy Store very regularly. Within about 6 months of our first ever 5-minute spot, you could do it. It very quickly became a big thing, you know, when comedy became the new rock and roll in the 90s and stuff, and you know, all that. It suddenly became what every kid wanted to be, a stand-up comic, because they'd seen it on telly, you know.
So you were living in London at that time. Where were you living?
I was living in southwest London, in Tulse Hill, which is just sort of between Brixton and, it's near Brixton.
And was you on your own, or was it was like?
Yeah, no, I was actually sharing a flat at that time with an old friend from school who recently died very sadly. Yeah, so we just lived together for a few years in South London.
So you know, I think that one of the main things that, like, you know, comes up a few years after, it's 1989 was Maid Marian, but at that time it does kind of, according to IMDb, you know, the career does get back on track, and you do News at 12, which was you know, that was a show that ran for a couple of years, I think, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But you also did The Bill at that point, Birds of a Feather, Phil the Plumber. You know, but you also did Spitting Image. You were the human face of Spitting Image.
I was the first human being on Spitting Image. Yeah, that was a weird old job. I mean, I was just going up for whatever came up, and it was this. There was a storyline in that series of Spitting Image. I mean, this is towards the end of Spitting Image, I think, where a box of puppets fell off, a skip full of puppets falls off the back of a lorry and escapes into the real world. So, and I can remember what the puppets were. They were like Mr. Spock and David Steele and a couple of other puppets. And they would meet various human characters, a policeman, a football hooligan, or whatever. And that was me. Well, actually, it was me and Nick Hancock. We were the two. We were the two actors that played all the parts. So yeah, that was a fun little job.
So you've been in London at this point for 5 years. You've got Maid Marian is 89, I think, is when it. So you
right
4 years, and then Maid Marian. Did you think, like, you know, could you sense, like, you know, the Maid Marian was the big job, or not?
Absolutely not. I mean, again just remember going up for it. I can remember vividly walking into to that audition, not knowing anything about the series, and not knowing that series would run for like 5 years, and you know, win loads of awards. I mean, it was a great show. It was a really great show, you know, created and written by Tony Robinson. But by the end of it, I was still doing stand-up, still doing other little bits of jobs, because Maid Marian would only be filming for whatever it was, a few months every year. But by the end of it, Tony was getting very busy doing, you know, Time Team, whatever else he was doing at the time. And he said, listen, do you want to help with the writing? Because I'm up against it. So I sort of co-wrote the last series of Maid Marian. So when Maid Marian finished, I'd just become a television writer. I'd sort of accidentally, do you know what I mean? Become a television. So, and I got a TV writing agent. And yeah, so then followed a few years of writing all sorts of weird stuff for television, which I didn't enjoy very much, if I'm honest.
Oh, that's interesting. Why didn't you enjoy it? Because Harry's Mad was around that time, and I like Harry's Mad.
Well, you know, stuff I was co-writing, like Harry's Mad, and you know, those kind of things. And then I got into a lot of animation, doing these shows for the Cartoon Network. You know, really good show. There was a show called The Cramp Twins, which I wrote on. The problem is, you're just getting notes from hundreds of different people. You know what it's like now when you're trying to deal with your own editor's notes. That's hard enough. But when you're dealing with a dozen sets of notes, often from people in different countries, because the funding for these shows, especially for animation, comes from all over the place. So here are the notes from the French, here are the notes from the Germans, here are the notes from the... And by the time you've written 25 drafts with a whole series of conflicting notes, you're losing the will to live. It's very hard to keep caring about something when you're thinking, this isn't getting any better. You know, all these notes are just, it's not getting any better than it was 5 drafts ago. So I sort of fell out of love with TV writing fairly quickly.
That's it. Just, you know, it's still on topic, but I mean, I'm just interested because it's something that I, you know, think about a lot. Is when I'm in London, I'm very aware of my accent.
Yeah.
Especially in publishers and festivals as well, you know, and all that type of thing. You know, I can't hear the Birmingham drawl in your voice now, but when you first went there, I'm assuming that you still had that kind of twang.
Yeah, and I've still got it if I'm talking to my mum.
Yeah. This is me, like, you know.
Yeah. No, you end up with a kind of nothing accent eventually. 3 years at university when you've got people from all over the place, it tends to knock it out of you. I mean,
Do you ever feel like you were an outsider at any point, or
not really, mate? No, I don't think so. I didn't really feel like that. No. It wasn't when I was doing acting jobs. It wasn't like I was surrounded with people from public school or anything. No, we just got on with it. It didn't feel like that.
Do you think that comes from like an innate confidence, though, with you? Because if you have decided very early on you want to be an actor, there has to be some kind of confidence within you to make that.
At the time, I was definitely confident. But looking back, it was misplaced. Looking back, that confidence is misplaced. I think I thought I was a far better actor than I actually was. And it's fine if you're doing a cough and a spit and, a couple of lines here and there. But I really don't think I was the actor I thought I was. I thought I was the finest actor of my generation. I definitely did have that confidence, which I think you've got to have. You'd be an idiot to go into that kind of area without thinking you were good at it. But looking back, I don't think I am. And now, I joke about it because my wife, is a television director, and she'll be casting some show, and I'll be just in the corner of the room going, "I did that." And I'll read a couple of lines, and she'll just go, "No, really, no. I don't even know how you got away with it." Stick to the writing. I mean, I do miss it. I do kind of miss that kind of.
You missed like the whole acting side of it.
I miss the showing off, which is always what it's been. Luca, really is what it's always been. I can remember teachers at school telling me to stop showing off. You must have had that as well. Oh, yes. Stop showing off, which I think is a horrible thing to say to kids, actually. I mean, if they're being disruptive, which I'm sure I probably was, trying to make other kids laugh or whatever it might be. But it was the one thing I swore to myself I'd never say to my kids. Not that either of them have shown any performing tendencies at all. But it was all just about showing off. And that's kind of all I wanted to do. And it's been a concerted effort to do that in different areas, showing off as an actor, showing off as a stand-up comic, which is a really odd thing generally, to just sit there seeking the validation of 100 strangers in a room, isn't it? It's kind of weird. And showing off now with writing, it's still giving a performance, isn't it?
That's the way I always describe it, is a performance. So we're into the 90s now, the greatest decade, which we always argue about.
Stop it now.
But you, so this is what I found very interesting, is that when like I, moved into this arena rather than living in a very working class area, is that other people get married later than what we do around here. So I was 22 when I got married. You were in your 30s by the time you got married.
I was 33. Yeah.
33. So do you think you were just, it didn't even cross your mind at that point to kind of settle down, or was it just didn't happen, or?
It just didn't happen. And, you have various long-term-ish relationships, a year and a half or a year or a couple of years, whatever it might be. And then, you meet the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. And so, I got very lucky. I'm punching well above my weight.
There's a lovely dedication in the upcoming novel, The Last Dance, to your lovely wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let people read that when it comes to it. But so you've been together over 30 years now. You've got 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
Worked in television.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you explain to her that you were going to be a crime fiction writer? How did that conversation go?
Yeah. Well, again, it was a sort of it wasn't like this massive. I'd been hanging around on the fringes of the crime fiction community, because basically it started out because I was a crazy collector of crime, first edition crime fiction, and I'd have the UK first and the US first and the proof, and just books were taking over the house. So Claire said to me, "Listen, we need to find a way for you to get these books for nothing, because this is a ridiculously expensive hobby." So I started reviewing, which meant I got sent books. So I started interviewing writers, interviewing Ian Rankin and Michael Connolly, people who are now mates. Such an odd thing, but I can still remember turning up to interview them, with a little dictaphone, shaking like a leaf, not knowing what to say to them. And going to the festivals and hanging around. And it was just, the missing piece of the jigsaw was writing the crime novel. But writing a novel seemed impossible to me. It just, even then, I'd been writing professionally for television and stuff for a while, but a half-hour TV script, that's nothing. A novel, I just thought, how much work is that? So I just never thought it was achievable. And then I had this idea. Then I just had this idea in about 1999 for the book that would become Sleepyhead. And I told Claire what the idea was, which was this. I'd read this book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly about locked-in syndrome. And I thought, what about if you could you do that to somebody on purpose? That would be the most evil, horrible thing you could do. And she said, well, why don't you? She was directing Casualty at the time. And again, these bits of synchronicity, these things, if that hadn't happened, it is a sliding doors moment. If Claire hadn't been directing Casualty and hadn't known this guy called Phil Coburn, who was the medical advisor, and I hadn't gone in to see him, and he hadn't said to me, well, my God, that would be fiendishly difficult thing to do, and if you got it ever so slightly wrong, you'd kill him, which was the light bulb moment that made me go, there's my book. Everything just fell into place. And so I still didn't think I could write it, and I went on holiday. Me and Claire and the kids went on holiday one year, and we had this villa in Corfu, I think, and I'd sit outside every night with a beer, and Claire would be sat there with a glass of wine, and I would just scribble in this notebook, just scribble, and by the end of it, I counted the words up, and there were 30,000 words. And I thought, that's about a third of a book. So suddenly it seemed achievable. It didn't seem so daunting and impossible. And I came back to London and I tarted those 30 words. And this is back on an old word processor, one of the really early word processor. And I can remember printing out these 30,000 words. And I printed out a cover page for it. So it said Sleepyhead by Mark Billingham. And I knew from what I'd seen that books had to have shout lines, like films do. And I'd seen posters on the Underground, and I'd thought of this shout line for Sleepyhead, which was, he doesn't want you alive, he doesn't want you dead, he wants you somewhere in between. And I printed that on the front of the manuscript. And a year later, that was on the side of buses. I know that's what caught the attention of the woman who's still my agent. And maybe it's what caught the attention of my first editor. And, I just thought that was a lucky thing I did.
That's 23 years ago now. Do you still remember the moment when, you got the agent? I mean, like, you already had an acting agent and a TV at this point. So you were aware of that kind of, so probably that moment wasn't as big as the moment that a publisher kind of said, we want to sign you.
And I can remember exactly where I was. I was standing outside Marks and Spencer's in Brent Cross Shopping Centre. I'd gone to Brent Cross Shopping Centre with Claire, and Claire was inside Marks and Spencer's, and I was just hanging about outside, and the phone rang, and it was my agent Sarah to say, publisher X wants the book. They want to publish the book. And that was at the moment when I went, well, it's going to get published. I mean, and bear in mind, I'd only written 30,000 words of it at this stage. Publisher X wants the book. And then later that day, she said, and publisher Y wants the book, and publisher Z wants the book. And it all went a bit crackers, and there was an auction. And that was, hugely thrilling and hugely exciting, but quite scary because I hadn't finished the book. But yeah, I can remember that moment very, very vividly.
So it must have been a very different kind of feeling as well, because, being a novelist is very different than being an actor or a stand-up comedian. I mean, you were going into a different arena. Was there any moments when you thought, I don't think I can do this, because you hadn't finished the book at that point?
Well, I was still doing stand-up at the time. And in fact, I carried on being a stand-up till about 2007. I mean, I was doing fewer and fewer gigs, and I wasn't really traveling very far with it because that, I'd got young kids by then. And by the time the books started to do okay, you've got to travel around to promote the books here and overseas and stuff. So I was, but because I was still doing it, it felt like, well, I've still got my job. I've still got I'm still telling jokes for a living. So that's all right. So even if this book thing doesn't work out, because even then I was aware that I'd got a 2-book deal. Even then I was aware that one of those books has got to do well. It's not, I mean, it's no different now. In fact, if anything, as we both know, it's probably even more brutal.
Yeah.
And I've got a book deal. No, I haven't. It can be that quick. But so no, I kind of, I'd had enough time to think about the story I was writing, and I just thought, yeah, I can finish it. No idea whether it's going to work. No idea whether anybody's going to buy it. But then I had this moment. Wait there. So look, this is the moment. It's still pinned to my wall over there. That's the moment the very, very first copy of it arrived. That's the proof copy of it. And I can remember just taking that out of a box and going, a book! Look, it's an actual book!
Where are you with that in that picture?
In Archway, North London, where we don't live anymore. But so this would have been in 2000 or 2001. Look at that. Look, no grey hairs at all.
Some haircut.
It's exactly this. It's pretty much the same hair. It's just, just a very different colour.
I mean, did you, once you'd finished the novel and the publisher was bringing it out and that type of thing, did you get the sense that this was something that you'd actually been waiting to do? You'd done the acting, you were doing stand-up. Yeah. This was actually what you were wanting to do.
Yeah, I did feel like, and it sounds like such a wanky thing to say, but I did feel like I'd kind of come home. I kind of thought, yeah, this is it. This is it. And, so this book came out, I was 40 when it came out. Was I? Yeah, I was. And there've been moments when I thought, I wish I'd done it 10 years earlier, There are writers, the same age as me who've written 15 more books than me because they started in their mid-20s but I'm glad I did all that other stuff. I'm really glad I did all of that other stuff. I'm glad I'm glad I did 2 Minute Silence at Dead of Hiroshima in that shopping centre. And I'm certainly glad I did the stand-up. The stand-up stood me in good stead. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I did all that performing stuff. But I can't believe how quick it's all gone, how quick the time's gone.
I was going to say,
I still feel like him.
Yeah.
I still feel like that the young maverick.
If you had a picture of you from when you did Dempsey and Makepeace, you'd probably still feel like him as well.
Yeah.
It's a weird kind of time. So Tom Thorne has become, synonymous with the crime fiction genre in the UK. I mean, when you were writing the first novel, did you think, well, the next one will definitely be a Tom Thorne novel as well?
I had it kind of in the back of my head, but when I went in to meet all those publishers for beauty contests, as they're called, when I had to go in, and I think I did them all on the same day, and I walked into all these boardrooms with fruit and muffins or whatever it was. Pretty much the first question they all asked was, "Is this the start of a series?" And I just went, "Yep." I knew yes was the right answer. So I'd probably have written another Thorne novel anyway. I probably would have done, but the fact that it was very much what they wanted a new series, because at that time, that was kind of the holy grail was a police procedural series. It's weird how quickly things change, and since then we've had all sorts of different subgenres come and go. But yeah, so I having said that, I didn't know. Well, you know this about the books, but I didn't know anything about him. I hadn't got him planned out or anything. So I just thought, right, I better get to know this bloke a bit.
I mean, because he does change quite significantly from the first to the second novel, and some of his likes and dislikes.
Yes, he does.
My favourite thing ever is the fact that he's well into his dance music in the first.
It's
trippy hardcore.
Look, you make your mistakes early, and that was such a big mistake. I just had this idea that because I remember that moment when I was writing the first book, and I thought, here we go, music. It's time for he's listening to music at home, or he's listening to music in the car, or whatever it might be. And I remember stopping, and literally, stopping for about an hour and going, hang on a minute. So Morse likes opera, and Rebus likes sort of the Stones and prog rock and all that stuff, and loads of them like jazz for some inexplicable reason. And then I went, right, no music. Mine's going to be the detective that doesn't listen to music. And I lived with this for a couple of days, and then just thought, oh, you idiot! You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Everybody you've got to have some. So I knew there would be some country because I was already a big country music fan, and then I thought, I know, speed garage and techno, whatever it was. So because I just thought I'll give him a taste for music that he's too old for, right? As I was at that time, because Thorne was the same age I was, which was one of the other big mistakes I made. I should have made him 10 years younger. And I certainly, in that first book, shouldn't have given him this penchant for trip hop and speed garage. So he goes into Tower Records when there still was a Tower Records, and he's trying to buy a Massive Attack album or something. And then when that first book finished, I just thought, what are you doing, you idiot? I mean, you've got to research all sorts of things. Yeah. And the last thing I want to be researching is this music, which I don't like. So it quietly went away. Yeah. It quietly went away. And then from that point on, it was just country.
Scaredy Cat is the second novel. And am I right in thinking this is the one that was based on something that happened to you personally? The one, the hotel thing in the 90s?
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so oh my God, I don't even know. I can't even remember what year it happened. I was writing a show called Night School, which was I think a great show, and in fact was the first thing I ever had published, because we did do like a novelized version of it, set at a school for nights in the 16th century or something, and this was all filmed in Manchester, and I was also in it. So me and my friend Peter, who I was in it with and who was co-writing it, we were staying in a nice hotel in Manchester. What we thought was a nice hotel in Manchester. And we'd had a couple of nights when we'd gone out on the town and drinking. On the third night, I said, look, come to my room. We need to talk about the filming tomorrow. And, we'll watch University Challenge. I remember what was on. We watched University Challenge and something else I can't remember. And they do a pizza and a beer for £5. That's the room service deal. So we ordered pizza and a beer for £5, and we had it, and we watched the telly, and we were talking about the show. And then there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and it was three blokes in balaclavas. And that, great moment when time kind of slows down and speeds up. And I can remember thinking, that's not room service. Just before one of them just punched me in the face, and they came charging in, and they did this. They turned the TV up really loud, and they picked up what was left of a bottle of beer and just trying to create chaos and fear and whatever. And they went, down on the floor or you're dead. Do you know what? I think they might have been Scousers. But anyway, let's pretend they were from Manchester. Down on the floor or you're fucking dead. And so, we just hit the floor, and then they tied us up and put bags over our heads and gave us a bit of a kick in. And we were in there for 3 hours, being held there for 3 hours, because they wanted to use our ATM cards either side of midnight to get 2 days worth of money. And this had happened at about 10 o'clock at night. And, so one of them stayed in the room with us while we were on the floor tied up, and the other two ran around Manchester. And then they just finally went. We were just aware. I can remember my friend Pete was on the other side of the room just going, are they gone? And I went, I think so. And we got ourselves free. And then we ran. I remember running, screaming down into the lobby of this hotel. I had a chair, and Peter had a fire extinguisher. And we went running in, going, ah! And all that's happening in the lobby is, nobody's got any idea any of this had happened. And obviously the police came and it was all sealed off and blah, 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 blah. And it was, as violent attacks go, I was pretty lucky. Nothing, I got a few kicks and punches and they nicked a few things, nothing, watch and a phone and whatever it might be. The only, I still have a very mild form of PTSD from it, which is which apparently is quite common, which is a massive, a fear of a really over the top reaction to any kind of sudden movement or loud noise, or if somebody drops a saucepan in the kitchen, I don't just go, oh, I go, ah! I mean, I've got a real weird thing about sudden noises and sudden surprises, but again, people have had it. But I wanted to use that. I wanted to use that in a book. It's a very long-winded answer to your question, mate. Just that idea of, if you can make somebody frightened enough, they'll do anything. You're just so terrified. The first thing the police said was, did they have knives or guns? I said, I I don't think so. But they didn't need them. They just run into the room going, down on the floor or you're dead, and you do what you're told, you know. And I wanted to write about that. So that's kind of what Scaredy Cat is about. And there's a subplot through it about these horrible things happening in hotels. I mean, at the time, I was still doing stand-up, so I was staying in a lot of hotels. And it was quite scary. But
and that's the book, that's Stuart Nicklin's first appearance.
That's the book where Stuart Nicklin first appears, yeah.
And that's the character that kind of has stayed,
he's been in a few, notably that book, a book called The Bones Beneath, and the most recent book, The Murder Book. He's back. And Scaredy Cat was the book that kind of broke out, really. Sleepyhead tends to be the one everyone remembers because it was the first one. And it sneaked into the top 10. Sleepyhead, God bless my publisher, did an amazing job. But Scaredy Cat was the one that, did really well and was shortlisted for the Gold Dagger and all that kind of stuff. So that was the one that broke out a bit.
At what point do you realise this is it? And now I'm a writer, and that's all I'm going to be?
Probably before Scaredy Cat came out. I mean, by the time Sleepyhead had done, well enough, I think I'd probably already signed another deal. And I knew that was what I was going to do, but that was also the time when I realised it got harder. That thing that nobody tells you, because you think, oh, I've done this, I can write a crime novel. And I sat down to write Scaredy Cat, and it was much harder than the first one had been. And Lazy Bones was much harder than Scaredy Cat. And each book, and I remember saying to somebody, why do they get harder? And whoever it was said, you idiot, they're supposed to get harder because you're trying to write a better book. You won't always write a better book, but you've got to at least have that ambition, right? And also by the time the books are rolling along and doing quite well, there's a sort of commercial pressure, because obviously the publisher goes, well, we want this one to sell a bit more and blah, blah, blah. And you want to get better reviews and prizes and all that stuff. But at the bottom line is you're sitting there in front of the computer trying to tell a better story than you did last time. So it's...
How do you find it writing in the way you do now? Because you've been in such, for 20 years, you were basically always working with other people, and now writing is very solitary. How did you find that kind of switch?
Quite hard. I'm not always particularly happy in my own company, and I do need to work with other people, which is why kind of all along the line, really, there's been little side projects where I've got to collaborate with somebody. On a book or a play or some such, or a screenplay or whatever it might be. Nothing's ever come to anything, but I've always had to have that. I'll spend all day doing on my own writing the book, and then have some fun working with somebody else. And of course, in the last few years, there's been a musical side to it. Notably working with My Darling Clementine on that show, an album we did, which was just brilliant, and working with you and the rest of the fun-loving crime writers, which is just... And I think one of the things we all get out of it is that collaboration thing, is we're not just Billy No Mates on our own. There's 6 of us, and we can just have a ball, And no, I definitely need to do that. I'm too gregarious to want to spend too much time on my own.
I mean, I would talk about the music. I think that'd be a nice place to kind of finish this. It's like, I think that came about in 2017, was it? Was it 2017? 2018?
16. I think so. Yeah. When we first, when 3 of us first played together, yeah.
So you've been, you were out to stand-up comedy at that point, the acting was done, and, well, yeah, apart from your, in the background of the Thorn series in 2010. But,
and the audio, and I do the audio book, so I was always getting a bit of jollies doing that.
You are, one of the things, because you had done, a couple of musical acts when you were doing, acting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But not to the level that, the fun-loving crime writers do it. I know personally how much music is, how important it is to you. I mean, and you kind of touched on it earlier. I'm imagining as a kid, music was a massive escape.
Yeah. And bear in mind, I'm growing up in the 70s, which is the best decade, Luke.
Well, we'll always argue about this.
Well, it just is. I don't know how many. Well, just because, when I started to become aware of music and buy music, it's the early days of kind of, well, it's glam rock, but then it's also prog. So, on the one hand, I've got T-Rex and Slade, but I've also got Genesis and Pink Floyd. And then suddenly punk happens, and I was the perfect age. I was 16. So punk and new wave and all that in one decade. Come on. But yeah, that's when I started to go see gigs and be in a band a little bit. I was in a band a little bit at university and a bit at school. So it's always been you'd chuck it all in a heartbeat to be a rock star, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So
that's what I discovered, is that most writers are just failed rock stars.
Of course. This is just like a gift. The Fun Loving Crime Writer has been just like a gift. 20 years into a career to suddenly have this, to be able to do this on the side is just as a side hustle. It's just brilliant.
What it strikes me is that you, as a person, you do kind of gravitated. You do find these things that make you happy. That keep you kind of creatively happy. You do gravitate and you find them. It's not. I'm not saying it's a luck thing, because I think a lot of it is talent driven. But you have kind of had, for the last 40 years, as an adult, you've it's always been creative, but you have always gone, I'm going to try that. Other people may have not gone to move to London. You decided to move to London, to kind of to do it. Is that you have always kind of took the chance? Is that something that you think about consciously, or do you think it's a subconscious thing of like, I'm not going to do things that don't make me happy?
I want to do things that make me happy, but I don't really. I don't think I've ever done anything that I thought was risky. I'm actually far too much of a coward for any of that. I'm quite risk averse.
That's really strange to hear, because I think that the opposite of you. I really do.
It does. No, moving to London just seemed. Bear in mind, I'm moving to London a few years after I decided to stay in Birmingham to go to university. Yeah. That's who I am right there, really. Moving to London just seemed, I think, I had to do. I didn't really have any choice. It wasn't like, if you want to be an actor and you want to do telly and radio and all that stuff, you had to move to London. So I just had to do it. It wasn't like, oh my God, what am I doing? And, there's never been risks involved in things like with the band. We thought this is either going to be rubbish or it's going to be fantastic fun. And even if it's rubbish, nobody else is going to know about it. And you know what I mean? It was just 6 of us in a rehearsal room.
I still honestly do think that a lot of the things that you did, because other people in that same situation would have gone, I'm going to stay here and find a job that's going to pay regularly, and I'll stick with this little theatre group that I kind of enjoy doing, or I'll do plays on the side. I know moving to London it's a big risk, because you could have got there, booked nothing for a year, and then had to move back to Birmingham with your tail between your legs.
With tail between my legs, yeah, maybe. Like I say, I did have that weird bit of luck early on when I started acting, and just got the first 4 things I went up for. And by the time I'd done them, I was just thought, oh, that's it, I'm an actor now. And luck. I'm a big believer in that expression of the harder I work, the luckier I get. Yeah. Nothing is purely down to luck, but I know I've had a lot of it. I have had a lot of good luck, certainly with the writing. I had, such a good, picking the right. I had to choose between agents, and I picked the right one. I had to choose between publishers, and I picked the right one. Sleepyhead could have bombed. And that would have been the end of that. And God knows, then I'd have been an old stand-up comedian by now. So definitely had some luck at the right moment.
I think obviously luck does play some parts in certain things, but I do think the way I see it is that I kind of, the sense I get is that you have always taken that step that other people may not have taken. You've gone up for those gigs, acting gigs. You've gone on stage a comedy store. When Tony Robinson says, "Do you want to write?" on the last series of Made Maddie, and you go, "Okay." You say yes a lot. You say yes to.
Yeah, but that's because the desire. That's because the desire to show off has always trumped any fear or risk. Do
you remember the last time you were nervous?
Do you know what? I'm getting more nervous as I get older. It's a really weird thing. You hear about people who've flown around the world, but suddenly as they hit a certain age and they suddenly get scared of flying, stuff like that. I'm actually, more nervous about. Probably the most nervous I am now is if the band have got a gig. Is half an hour before we're on stage when the band are doing a gig. I'm extremely nervous. I do get a little bit of mild stage fright, but I've always believed that if you're not nervous, it's probably a bad sign. You're probably being a bit complacent or whatever it might be. I'm nervous. I'm genuinely nervous before a book comes out. I'm very nervous about this new book that's coming in May because it's such a different book and it's a change of direction and it's a new series and everything. So yeah, there's a general sort of apprehension, but actually nervous that you can feel it in your chest. Yeah, before I go on stage, definitely.
Did you think after 20 years you would be starting a new series in the way that you are now?
No, I probably wouldn't have thought that even a couple of years ago. But I'm convinced it's the right thing to do. I'm very confident I've made the right decision in doing it. Ask me in a year's time if I should have done it. But no, you can't. You've got to keep things interesting. You've got to keep things interesting. And in terms of stuff that's happening aside from the books, things couldn't be more interesting. The band's doing stuff, and it's great. I've got all those side hustles on the go, and which are hugely fulfilling and make me very happy. But in terms of the job, the books, I've got to keep that interesting. I've got to keep that interesting because if I'm not interested, readers aren't going to be interested. And I never thought I'd write 18 Thorn novels, let alone it'll be the next book I start will be the 19th. But I think I've only been able to keep myself interested in those by doing some other things, standalone books and whatever. And it just felt time to write something very different. There's been comedy at the heart of almost everything I've done, Luca, over the years. I've always just thought of a joke. I want to do a joke. And the Miller books give me that opportunity to just, try and put some cheap gags in.
I think having read The Last Dance, and I think I said this to you privately, is that it does give, I didn't realize, but I've been around for 10 years now and I didn't even know. It feels like 5 minutes.
So you're not a maverick anymore.
I mean, that it was scary when I realized that. I was like, geez. It is, I think I said this to you, it's inspiring when you see writers who have been around for, it turns out, not much longer than you have. It's like when you've been around for 20 odd years to do that. Val is another one who's like that. Val, who will just go in a completely different direction and, has 4 different series on the go. And, to see that is very inspiring to younger writers. Do you, though, still feel like a sense of, you have a massive readership who love Thorn. Is that where the nerves come in? Because you're worried about that readership and how they're going to react to Miller?
Yeah, inevitably. The proof of the pudding actually is going to be the second Miller novel, because I think what will happen with the first Miller novel is that the majority of Thorn fans will give it a go. They'll give it a go because hopefully they like my stuff and they'll go, well, they might then decide it's not for them. But on top of that, I think the books are different enough that I might gain some readers that have never read anything I've ever written. Yeah. But there's a guy that keeps posting on Twitter whenever anybody, if the publisher puts something up or another writer puts something up and goes, the new Mark's new series is starting. There's this guy who just immediately posts going, not for me. No, thank you. Not for me. It's Tom Thorne or nothing. Not having it. No. And it's like he's personally affronted. He's like he's a partner that I've dumped or something. And the Miller book is like my new partner. And he honestly, he gets so upset. This one guy on Twitter, you see if we can find him. And he's quite angry about it. So yeah, I am a little bit nervous, but it's not, you've read it. It's not a million miles away from a Thorn novel.
It's not like it's set in space and it's about
it's just slightly different in tone. I'm still writing about the same things, slightly different in tone and with more jokes. I mean, it's really that simple.
There's a lot of elements of phone readers will love. I know that for a fact, but I think you're right. You will find new readers as well.
I hope so.
This is another thing on my list of not being risk averse. Is that you could have just been writing Thor novels until,
Yeah, and I think I'd get bored. I think I would get bored quite easily. And I'm hoping that after 2 years away from him, when I do go back, and in fact, it's going to be the next thing I write because I've finished the second Miller novel. So I've got to start sitting down and thinking about the next Thor novel. And I'm actually finding that quite scary because I've been living with Miller for 2 years, well, for more than 2 years now, because he started off as a TV thing in my head. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens in the next Thorn novel. I want to get to 20. I do want to get to 20 Thorn novels, but
so this is the last. I'm going to finish this up now because we've been talking for a very long time. We could have talked longer, but I know we always joke about the age difference between us, but when you reach 60, did you start thinking about when you might stop?
Yeah, I suppose somewhere in the back of my head, I was thinking 30 books. 30 books would be quite a good place to stop, which means I've got to write another 7. By which time I'll be, 67 or 68, and that's probably about. But there's no reason. I mean, as long as I can still write, it's not like, I don't do a job that's physically very demanding, even though I can't, captain the English crime writers football team anymore. Not unless it's walking football. Are we going to do something about that? Can we make? Because I always thought walking football was the way forward, but somebody told me the other day it's not as easy as you. It's not ambling football. It's not okay.
Nick Quantrill plays walking football.
Yeah.
He said it's very demanding actually.
Yeah. But physically, in all seriousness, as long as I'm still compost mentis. There's no reason why I can't write. And I don't know what else I'd do with my time. I like it's, and I like having a book out. I like all the other stuff. You know how much I like the events and the festivals and all that stuff. That's the perk of the job for me. Sitting here typing, that's the job. It's the stuff that goes with it that I've always been fond of.
So, I have always considered this a job that you can't really retire from. When the child announced he was retiring, I was like, I didn't know we were allowed to. I thought you had to keep going, and I think it is. I think you're right. As long as you can still, it's still up there. I think you will carry on.
It may not be a book a year. I've written a book a year ever since I started, and that may slow down. So you might be book every 2 years or every 18 months or something.
Is there something that you wish you could do now that you can't because you're a writer?
If I have one ambition left, in all seriousness, I want to do a radio show. I bloody love radio, and I love appearing on radio. And when I have had that opportunity to host a radio show for a week or for a couple of hours and pick the music, I'm like, loved it. The idea of doing a radio show once a week with people calling in, picking the music, getting your friends on and guests, I would love to do a radio. That's my one remaining big ambition, is to do a radio show.
And you know what? I don't think there's. I think you probably will end up doing it because as you've discovered through this.
I'm hoping somebody is listening to this podcast, some eager listener of Two Crime Writers going, I've got a gap. I've got a gap here on Radio 6 Music. I mean, I've done shows on 6 Music. That's what kind of the bug bit me. There's a show called Paperback Writers, which I've done a couple of times, where you get an hour to have a conversation like this, but just with the listener, and you pick certain key bits of music and you talk about them. The idea of doing that every week, what a joy.
Okay, last 2 questions, very quick.
Right.
Favorite novel of all time?
The Maltese Falcon.
And your favorite song?
Luca. Penny Lane. I mean, it's got to be a Beatles song, probably, but you made me pick quickly. It'd be a McCartney Beatles song.
If we have this conversation in a couple of years, you'll probably have a different.
it'd be a different Beatles song, but there you go.
Mark, thank you so much for being the guinea pig for this new format.
I'm the canary in the coal mine, and it's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. So yeah, thanks very much, and thank you everyone else for watching or listening. And I think I'm going to throw to me now anyway, saying goodbye. So there you go.
Cheers.